Good morning, dear students. In today's class, I would like to discuss with you the topic history as fiction. The moment when we hear the word history, the idea that comes to your mind is that it is a study of the past. But such a broad idea, however, does not really help us to come up with a useful definition of history. The past includes anything and everything that has happened before. But as we are aware, a historian never attempts to study all those things that happened in the past. That is, a historian needs to study not everything that happened in the past, but what could be said about the past. Now, there is a basic dilemma whether history is a study of human affairs in the past or that of the natural events or phenomenon. That means natural history. While dealing with the natural world's history, the historian could derive cause and effect relationships effectively. But dealing with the human affairs, the historians realize that they cannot use the notion of causality in a strictly scientific sense. So here, there is an important point that we need to understand. When we study the past, are we studying the natural history or the history of human affairs? So when we talk about the natural history, we can find out a cause and effect relationship. This has happened because of this. A cause and an effect. I'll give you an example. For example, look at this. If one says that the introduction of railways connected the isolated parts of India during the colonial period, here the cause and effect relationship is not so problematic. But there is a problem when somebody says such a connectivity enhances cultural unity of the diverse country, because the second point is related with the human affairs. We know that even when there is connections, transportation facilities, you cannot ensure that this will bring a change in the human mind. We know that in a country like India, caste system is such a strong influence in the human affairs. Even when we have transportation facilities, we cannot make sure that this will bring some kind of a change in the mindset of the people. So what I'm trying to tell you here is there is a basic problem when we talk about the study of the past. We study about human affairs as well. So can we study everything in the strictly scientific sense? That means, what exactly then the historian does? That is a question. We say that a historian unearths artifacts, discovers manuscripts, or he meticulously recovers the details of significant happening. What exactly he's doing by examining all these things? He's trying to develop a narrative, an account of what happened in terms of the sequence of events. But how far the story is governed exclusively by the collected facts or being shaped by the imaginative faculty of the historian is a serious methodological question. We already mentioned that what exactly the historian is doing. He's trying to come up with some of the historical facts. He unearths some monuments, some documents, but at the end of the process, he's coming up with a narrative. Here comes the question of the role of historian. This is something that we need to analyze in detail. Well, when we talk about the history, in the past, this was something considered somewhat equal to literature. History is regarded not as one of the social science disciplines, but something similar to what you call literature. A historian was conventionally regarded as a literary man, somewhat similar to a literary man. What was he doing? He was trying to tell stories. This was the condition until late in the 19th century. They regarded themselves neither as social scientists nor as humanistic scholars, but rather as literary men, men of letters. Only towards the end of the 19th century, as the discipline of history was professionalized and academized, gradually that majority of practitioners in the field had come to hold the view that history is something similar to something that can be considered as a social science discipline. And also they attempt to consider themselves as a dispassionate seeker after truth using scientific method. A scholar much more like an anthropologist or sociologist than a novelist or playwright. But we try to come up with a very important question here. When we talk about the historiography, the art of constructing history, it's always a serious concern whether it deals with only objective facts or it involves subjective interpretation. The question is whether history is just an accumulation of facts or it does involve an interpretation of such facts also. Here comes the observation of E.H. Carr, the British Marxist historian. He talks about this problem in his book, What is History? He addresses this question and asserts that the happenings in the society in which the historian is placed have an enormous role to play in the writing of history. Now, historical facts are facts as long as they are being collected, interpreted, and presented to us by a historian. The facts are always refracted through the minds of the historian. So the role of the historian and his or her social positioning is also important when we encounter the work of an historian. A historian writes history with an imaginative understanding of the people whom he or she is writing about. A historian is also a product of his or her age. His or her present engagement with the reality also has a bearing upon his or her writing. This brings us to the question of subjectivity in works of history. It's a question of what is true and what is false. And finally, the dilemma of what is to be accepted as the truth. This is a very important point. So we have a notion that history is a bundle of truth. It talks about, it's an authentic record of the past. It talks about objective truth. But the question is, how far can we accept this? We have already mentioned that historian is a human being who has his or her ideas. Subjective element plays very important role. So when he collects facts, when it goes through his minds, there will be some transformation. So this is a very important question. A historian is neither a master of his or her facts, nor is he or she to be mastered by the facts. According to Carr, history is a continuous process of interaction between the historian and his or her facts. In other words, it's a continuous dialogue between the past and the present. History cannot study a bit of process in isolation of its own term, but as a whole process of interconnectivity. So a historian selects a part of the past and connects it with what happened before it and what followed after it, the way the part is placed in a wider context. That way, the part is placed in a wider context. At the last instance, history is the work of historians who also have views and assumptions about the world they live in. Instead of eliminating these subjectivities, it is preferable to make them explicit. So this is an idea that we need to understand. We should never conceive history as a pack of authentic record of the truth. But we should acknowledge the fact that history also, the art of writing history, also involves subjective elements of the historians.